You can certainly look at the power of this wave of technology is dwarfing everything that came before it. And as you generate more and more friction, that's where you start to see some of these stories of we're not yet getting the return that we expected. The thing that I think is most important is having a realistic view of how something works today. Find that person who is inside an organization and they are accepted, but they are a non-conformist in the sense that they can drive that change.
Welcome to the Enterprise Thought Leadership Podcast, where we explore the latest in enterprise trends, tech, and strategy with the top leaders shaping the future.
Welcome to Enterprise Unlocked. I'm your host, Radhika Mukherjee, Editor-in-Chief of Enterprise Talk. Our guest today is Thomas Scott, CEO of Wrike. Thomas joined Wrike as Chief Financial Officer in 2022 and moved into the role of Chief Executive Officer in July 2023. As CEO, he oversees the execution of Wrike's long-term strategy. Thomas brings more than 20 years of experience as a top executive at several companies, including Zebra Technologies, Fetch Robotics, Corning Optical Communications, and Spider Cloud. Welcome to the podcast, Tom.
Hey, thank you for having me today.
Thank you so much, and I am really excited about this conversation. So let us set the stage for our audience. Many of the reasons attributed to AI projects not delivering results seem completely unrelated to technology. The main issues seem to be messy workflows, unstructured data, and unclear governance protocols. We'll start by getting to know the problem a little better. Tom, what are the main reasons for enterprises getting less than stellar results from AI adoption?
Yeah, I think you always have to go back to the three forces that are coming together with anything related to something like this: the people, the process, and the technology. And whenever you go into a new wave of, the next sort of like investment era, and AI is obviously one of those, the focus is overwhelmingly on the tech and what the tech is able to bring. And very frequently there is less upfront attention on the process and the people that are attached to it. And you can certainly look at the power of this wave of technology is dwarfing everything that came before it, but I don't think it breaks that fundamental relationship between those three inputs of people, process, and tech. And so when you look at the emphasis that has gone into everyone should adopt this, let's adopt it now, it's not putting as much emphasis on, am I scaling something that is a broken process? Am I trying to scale or drive an outcome that doesn't have the buy-in of the people that are involved in it? And ultimately, all of those things generate friction. And as you generate more and more friction, that's where you start to see some of these stories of we're not yet getting the return that we expected. And it's because we're not bringing along the other, kind of the other pieces of the stool, which is the people and the process aspect of it.
Yeah, you mentioned friction. What are the major friction points you've noticed in generative AI or even agentic AI adoption, like to get into the specifics?
The thing that I come across most frequently is broken workflows or processes that are sitting there. And there is often a human interplay that is there as well, where you have a long-term process that has evolved over the course of a company's life cycle, over many different people, many different reorganizations, and it's still held together by humans that are bridging the gap on whatever stickiness is happening within that existing workflow. You then go to automate it. And whether you are automating this with an agent or whether you are just simply, putting together traditional automation mechanisms, you find that you are scaling something that is essentially broken in practice. And I come across that. I come across that frequently. Whether you are looking at, the software development lifecycle, whether you are looking at a content creation process within marketing, whether you are looking at a product launch workflow, there are often these manual handoffs that are happening where rather than trying to automate that base process, you're ultimately better off stepping back and redesigning what it is that you are trying to accomplish with the technology that you have at hand. And that is where I really see that friction coming out, both in conversations I have with customers, as well as internal things that we're trying to build on our own here at Wrike.
Yeah. And what are the different approaches being adopted to transition to AI-powered workflows that you've seen?
The thing that I think is most important is having a realistic view of how something works today. And this is a responsibility I put on leaders inside Wrike of, look, you cannot delegate understanding how the work of your function is being done today. Like you really have to get in there and understand that as you're taking work, like whatever work is, and you're taking it from point A to point B, you really need to understand what is the mechanism to get there, who owns that workflow, where is the friction coming in. So that's sort of like the table stakes expectation I have of my own leadership team. Then you have to take the direct responsibility of, in this era, and you are rebuilding something, how would you rebuild it today? So don't necessarily anchor on the way it worked, the way it worked before. And I'll go back to that example of the SDLC. Like the software development lifecycle has been around for a very long time at this point. It's well understood by anyone who worked in software engineering. And it's being completely redesigned right now. And it's moving from a very linear process to one that is more simultaneous, where you are surrounding people that are essentially moving from specialist into full stack. And that is a complete redesign. That is not an optimized and existing process. It's saying, hey, look, we're creating a completely new way of doing this. And it's a way to break that linearity. And it happened within software first, but it's ultimately happening everywhere. It's like when I have this conversation in other groups, I almost always talk about full stack professionals, meaning move away from specialization. How do you empower full stack individuals to be able to orchestrate work around them? And that means that they need to have the visibility into it. And it means you need to fundamentally redesign that process. But it does start with, what are we doing today? What is the business outcome that we want to generate? And then who are the people that we need to plug into this that have that skill set? Because it's not always the people that are running that process, as it exists.
Yeah. I want to delve a little bit more into this full stack professional that you mentioned, How does that work in practice, and how are you seeing that play out in different departments?
So the way I think about it, and I'll give you a few examples from the teams that we've been talking about. A full stack professional, let's talk about it in an engineering sense for 1 minute, and then we'll talk about it in a marketing sense, and we can extend it from there. If you think about engineering, you've had engineering specialized for a long time, and you've got a back-end developer, you've got a front-end developer, you've got QA specialists that are there. We see engineers that are emerging more on a full stack basis, where they're working across the entire code base with a closer understanding of product as well. And that gives them the ability to kind of pull more strings across the organization and orchestrate that work. when you translate that into a marketing group, think of it as integrated campaigns where you have someone who's not necessarily a demand gen specialist, but they're working across product marketing, they're working across demand gen, they're working across paid, understanding how do you bring these together, which is much more important in the world that we are today, where we're trying to cut through into new forms of being discovered from the models for AI assisted search, but being able to position brand, and ultimately being able to get customers to recognize the value that's there. And it's a change because for a long time, companies have driven specialization with their workforces, and we're asking for the next iteration now, which is I need curious, broad thinkers that are able to go deep when necessary, but be able to cover a much broader swath that's out there. And so it kind of shifts what you're developing in your employees and what you're ultimately looking for.
Yeah. What does a career path look like though for such full stack professionals?
I think it's an interesting time to be coming into the workforce. I mean, when I look back on my own career, I greatly benefited from that type of learning, even though I didn't know it at the time. If you look back across my own career, I worked in everything from telecom services to infrastructure, robotics, software, and across a number of different investor classes, everything from public companies to venture to private equity. And so I've kind of seen a broad mix, which means that the pattern recognition after all these years of doing that is really, really broad. And when I've often had conversations with people asking about my own career, I've always says like, look, you can't plan a path. You ultimately have to optimize on the breadth of the experience that you're going after. And that's the advice that I give now, that I don't think that you can pick a trade or like a specialty, but obviously you want to have some depth in something, and as soon as you can broaden out, the better, because I do think that is what is going to be valued much more, that curiosity, the ambition, and just sort of like the always learning mindset that comes along with that. And when I look to the people that have done best inside Wrike, they all kind of fit that pattern where they're very broad thinkers, and they're probably deep in one thing, but they recognize that they couldn't just trade on that, and they got very broad. And I think that's the message that we ultimately have to be providing, because if you're out in the marketplace recruiting for that type of role, they're hard to find. And so you have to find those people that have the capability and have started on that journey, and then bring them in and kind of continue to work with them to develop that sort of full stack view as I was talking about it.
Yeah, and I think that also definitely needs a change in mindset and leadership also, as you were saying. But for this change especially, how hands-on does leadership need to be in heading this change and leading, the path forward?
I have always thought being hands-on as a leader was important, but I think it is completely non-negotiable, completely non-negotiable at this point, where you have to have the authenticity of being inside your own product, feeling the friction. You have to be in the details around those workflow examples that I was giving you. You have to be close to the employee base to be able to talk about the recruiting model that we were talking about. And so I just don't think that there's any exception for a leader, whether you're at the role that I have in the organization, or you're 2 or 3 levels or more, beneath the executive leadership team. You've got to be able to demonstrate that you are in the details. And I mean that across all 3. I mean that across, people, process, and tech, to be able to demonstrate it. And that means you need to be experimenting across all three so you've got the ability to discuss it. And it becomes even more relevant if you are customer facing. Because I spend a lot of time talking to, Wrike's bigger accounts. In fact, I spend a lot of time talking to accounts of all sizes. And a lot of the discussion is split between, hey, what's going on with Wrike? But there is also a whole lot of discussion of how are you approaching transformation within your business today? And so the fact that I am deep in transformation, I'm constantly talking about, look, here's what I've done that worked. Here's some areas where we have some learning. Kind of what are you seeing on your side? And it kind of gives you that common language to be able to talk with someone because you're so deep into it.
You talked about the realistic point of view. I want to bring you back to that also, and especially in the context of these conversations. So what does a realist's point of view look like with AI for top management or leadership in general?
To me, the realist point of view is you have to have the perspective of what are the friction points that we are talking about. And if you are not a hands-on leader, it's very difficult for you to be able to appreciate the sort of tension point between the power of the technology versus where you get that friction being actually able to deliver the return against it. And I like to take the view that you need to get into those details with your team and be able to push them to experiment and to be able to develop the return against it. But don't divorce yourself from just how much friction there is to being able to adopt it. Because I view my job as a leader in several dimensions. Like, I need to be setting like aggressive targets for the organization. I need to be realistic about where the friction is. And then I need to be enabling those teams to be able to deliver against it. And then I need to celebrate it where I'm actually able to get out there and say, hey, look, this was the target we set. Here was the friction we overcame. Here is what we learned from it. Let's celebrate that. And then let's take that on to the next. And so that's what I mean by that realistic piece. It's let's not fall in love with the narrative. Let's fall in love with like what we can actually do, and then let's celebrate the work that it took to get from point A to point B there.
Yeah. Now, speaking about actually doing, does achieving efficiency mean fundamental process redesign rather than simple automation of tasks? How does this work in practice as well?
So let's split that a little bit, and I'd say like you can absolutely generate return inside a business with workflow automation that lives within the parameters of an existing workflow. Like absolutely, I see it with our customers all the time, and it can be anything from you have an intake process that can be extremely manual. You're able to automate that either through some of the automation tools that we offer, our forms or our intake agent. And you don't have to completely redesign how the process works, and you will get return on that basis just because you're removing friction and touches in something that is very, very repeatable work. If you are looking for larger transformation, then yes, I do believe that you ultimately have to take a hard look at the workflow that you have in front of you and think about how you would be redesigning that at scale. And in that case, that absolutely requires you to examine the people, the process, the tech across that, and understand how you'd want to pull some of those steps out, who actually needs to be involved, what are the guardrails that you would put in place, and then ultimately what's the business outcome that's there. And I think when we talk to customers about transformation like this, you often have to meet them where they are as an organization. And that means some companies are a little further along in terms of like how they want to be able to drive their transformation and are willing to do a lot more. And others are wanting to try it, prove it out, and then ultimately scale over time. And we're architected to be able to work with them wherever they are on that continuum.
Great. And you mentioned redesign. I want to go into that a little bit more. What level and depth of process and organizational redesign is needed to find true success with AI?
I think it really depends on the workflow that you're talking about and where you are today. I mean, even if you take, my marketing organization inside Wrike today, we have run that organization on Wrike for a long time, where we've got workflows set up that go on a cross team basis. We drive our content process on that. We drive our campaigns on that sort of continuum. And I would say there's already a fair bit of automation that is contained. But about a year ago, or a little more than a year ago, we looked at redesigning. We looked at redesigning that, and we started looking at how do we remove even more friction from our content and video production. How do we better align teams on campaigns to be able to get those to market more quickly? How do we essentially bring agentic intelligence to our campaign performance data? So essentially looking at campaign data in Wrike, looking at performance data within some of our third-party tools, bringing those things together. And what we discovered was there was a whole lot more to unlock, and we've continued redesigning that workflow. Within our engineering teams, I would say it's very similar. So you take the example that we were talking about earlier about the SDLC. We did not originally start tinkering with that. What we started working with was we introduced coding assistants within our developer base, and we absolutely saw increased efficiency within that team. But it was measured like lots of other companies in the 10 to 15% incremental efficiency that we saw. That then started extending into engineers that were more fully adopting it. So not just using it as personal efficiency, but using it as team level efficiency and starting to build more and more guardrails and sort of protocols around what they were building. Well, the efficiency continues to go up, and we've evolved that more and more into complete fast teams, and we're looking to figure out how we can extend that to more inside the organization. But I would say it's a continuum. I don't think that you can just come in and say, today we are going to redesign everything. Tomorrow you will have a new workflow and everything will be different. I do believe there is a progression that you have to go down where you are working with your people to understand what you're doing today. You are looking to get buy-in around experimentation. You are looking to extend that from your early adopters who are getting success, and then you are building workflows around them. I think if you go against that progression, you go back to the point in the story that you and I were talking about of you're just focusing on the tech and you're not necessarily focusing on the people, the process, and the tech all at the same time to bring them along in this journey.
Yeah. So I'd like to look at that process bit a little bit more. Are we moving away from serial processes to parallel processes and workflows across various departments?
I think that is definitely one of the underlying assumptions. So when you start thinking about orchestration, orchestration is fundamentally parallel because you've got something that's sitting at the center that is the orchestrator, and it is constantly going out and touching various pieces of a workflow. So I do think that you're moving away from a linear progression serial model to something that is more orchestration driven. And there might be serial aspects of that, but overall, I do believe it's a lot more parallel processing that you're going to be seeing within workflows. And that goes back to that point about workflow redesign. A lot of workflows are going to have to evolve on that basis to be able to work in that manner.
Yeah. Which department will kind of lead this change, do you think?
Well, I think we've seen that the more the more technical departments like product and engineering have always led, because they tend to be data driven, they tend to be very process specific. They've got the right skill set of individuals that are in those departments. And so they're very used to working in this manner. And even if you go back to the very beginning of Wrike 20 years ago, Wrike was coming onto the stage as a work management application. And there were a lot of engineering tools that were out there that were not as easy to use, but had been adopted by developers as part of that progression. What we're seeing right now is, if you look at where you have seen by far the greatest adoption, it's again in that developer community, and it's kind of moving at an exponential pace. Line of business users is a little bit different. And Wrike historically has largely sold into line of business users. And so we'd be selling into, services teams, we'd be selling into marketing teams, we'd be selling into manufacturers, where you've got like a mix of, manufacturing that's there, you got a mix of product, you've got a mix of sort of other corporate functions that all come together. And ultimately, what you find when you get into those types of workflows is they are less technical as a user base. Their work tends to be a little bit less formulaic, meaning it's a little bit just messier from a categorization standpoint. And so you will see those teams come along, but it brings into focus a few things that we really have to care about, which is, how do you make the technology approachable? So it's able to resonate, it's easy to use. And I'll give you an example of how we've tried to speak to our customers in that manner. We introduced a conversational agent builder, where you can go in and type in plain English what it is that you want to accomplish, and build an agent on that basis. That's necessary because, again, the type of work is very different than that technical area. And so I think as you're moving into some of the workflows where Wrike has historically done a lot of business, we're adapting what some of those early adopters found successful, but we're trying to translate it into, here's where work is different, and here's how we're able to impact those workflows. And so I think that diffusion will happen. It will just take more time than what we saw on some of the early successes around engineering in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like a very good progression, actually, moving from engineering into all the other departments. It also kind of brings to my mind the very human element that we are talking about, right? So what's the role of imagination and creativity in all of this, and how we can get the best out of, generative AI or even agentic AI?
I think the imagination goes back to that people discussion that we were having, and I'll make sure I say this really clearly. Like, I am human-centric in kind of every sense of the word. Like, I've obviously spent my entire career in technology, but it's building technology for humans. And when I think about what gets me excited about this era, that full stack model of employee development greatly resonates with me. And it greatly resonates with me because you are unlocking that potential for broad creativity and the application. where when you find people that have that capability to drive organizational impact, and you are putting these tools around agent building, workflow optimization, business transformation, kind of all in one place, I think you are really unlocking the power of an organization at that point, as opposed to like potentially very talented people being verticalized within their special area where they deliver impact, but it's in this one little area of the business. And if we do this right, we're completely shifting the sort of shape of an organization where you can get more of these PowerPoints with individuals to unlock their creativity. So I think that's a core component of it. It's one of the things that I find more exciting about what we're doing.
That's a very inspiring and hopeful picture, seriously. Do you think that the human in the loop role has actually expanded as a result?
I think the human in the loop role is becoming increasingly important. And I'll give you the way that I frame it at Wrike, and then I'll kind of end on that point. So like when I talk about where I see the value of something like Wrike to customers or analysts, I talk about it in the form of 3 C's. I talk about context, I talk about control, and I talk about collaboration. And when you think about just sort of like the collective awareness right now, there are very few individuals who are close to this technology that would disagree that context is important. Everyone understands that more context generally equals better insights that's there. And Wrike helps build that context engine, and it also helps sort of maintain the privacy of it as you're putting that together. I would argue that control is becoming increasability important and understood. And by control, I mean governance, and I mean the auditability of like who decided something. It is the accountability that comes along with it. So it's the access. It's the audit trail, but ultimately it's the accountability of you unleash something for your organization, who's responsible, and being able to trace it back. And then the third piece is collaboration, which I think is probably the least appreciated of the 3, but might ultimately be the most important. And we built Wrike on the basis of human collaboration. And we are evolving Wrike for human plus AI collaboration, and that's human in the loop. And if you take that back to the point that I was talking about, that I am human-centric first and foremost, that is a very important element to me of how do you take that collaboration, make sure that you're bringing the right context to the table with the right level of control. Because again, I ultimately want humans accountable for what we are doing. And so that human in the loop has to be in the right at the center of what you're turning loose. And some things, it can be backward looking. You're kind of verifying that workflows delivered what you expected. But some are far more important, and making sure that you are setting boundaries and observing it up front, because again, I ultimately want humans deciding and putting their creativity to work here and not just taking a backseat position.
Yeah, completely makes sense. Now, going back to operations plus collaboration and also how humans take decisions, is going big on AI the way, or is starting small, proving the model, understanding how to derive ROI, and then scaling, collaborating, gathering momentum a better way?
I'm not a believer in the Big Bang. I've done transformations over the course of my career, and every single one of them started with getting early wins. Because no matter what you're asking someone to change, there is skepticism of like, well, I've done this for a long time, this works, I don't really want to do this differently. And you have to go in and you have to create an experimenting culture. You have to create winners. And by winners, I mean people who you are celebrating for putting the work in and delivering business outcomes. And as you start to get that, what you'll find is others naturally want to come along once you demonstrate that you've created some wins there. And what we've done inside Wrike is no different. You know, we've started small. We have worked with individuals that were, you know, hand raisers saying like, I'm interested, I want to put extra time into this. We've enabled them. Not every idea has worked. It's just it won't, and maybe the time is not right. Maybe it'd be a good idea later. Maybe it just wasn't a good idea, and that's okay. We then want to take that and start to scale off the back of it. But at least for me personally, I've never seen the Big Bang work. You have to build this bottoms up, and as a leader, you better know who those people are in your organization. You need to know them personally, and you need to understand exactly kind of like what's working, what's not. And that kind of goes back to my ethos around being extremely hands-on, because if you're not hands-on, you're not able to cultivate that environment, and you're not able to ultimately scale it up, because scalability requires trust at the end of the day.
Yeah. So you're saying like a pilot and then a scale up is possibly a good way to go.
Always. No, always.
Yeah, completely makes sense. And you know, every time I have a conversation about AI, data always comes up. So I'd like to get your perspective on that as well. So what are some strategies and frameworks to make enterprises data AI ready? What are you seeing in Wrike around your customers, and even things that Wrike themselves or yourself have done? That would be great as well.
You know, like data, I think that there's a pretty broad understanding that fragmented data sets, or you know, contradictory data sets is a very large blocker to large scale, you know, workflow automation within an AI world. You know, we at Wrike have spent a lot of time bringing together our data sets over the last few years. And I can't tell you it was because we fully understood where the world was going, but we understood that we had to be working off a common platform on our understanding of data. Within the Wrike product itself, we think about this in a very similar way. And the way we built Wrike as a product is it's organized around a data model that we refer to as the work intelligence graph. And this is all about capturing the full view of context. So it's the data layer, it's the relationships between the users, it's the timestamps that come together, and bringing all of this together. And the idea is the more data that you are able to plug into this, the more that you are able to drive that consistency on outcomes, as you were talking about in terms of that fragmentation. This comes up though in almost every customer conversation that I have as a challenge point for them. And you can imagine the sorts of examples that are out there. I had dinner with a customer in Europe a few weeks ago where they were talking about multiple factories that they have with different ERPs, all going back decades, and looking for a way that they're not going to rip those out, but they're looking for a way to essentially harmonize data sets across the top. So they've got, you know, big programs that they're looking to work with Wrike on to kind of bring these data sets together. I've got customers that have done M&A over the last 30 years where they've got different ways of describing data. They've got different workflows that are sitting there, and they're often looking for ways to create a enterprise layer over the top to at least extract insights and have a common enterprise framework for looking across it. Because again, you're not going to rip out every system that sits at the operating level or change every data record that you've got, but you do have to come up with a common framework, and that requires that mapping exercise, that requires bringing the information together, and then looking how you can make decisions across the top. And I see a lot of those themes that are playing out with customers right now.
Right. So when you're saying this, what came to my mind was that this challenge is, I think, the most acute for legacy organizations, right? Large organizations, a lot of data across, I don't know, decades perhaps. What's like your top 3 pieces of advice for such organizations?
Oh gosh, I mean, my top advice goes into like where are you trying to take your organization? And I'll give you a pre AI example from me, but like years ago, I ran an ERP consolidation program for a company I was at. And it was so messy, given all the organizations that we were trying to bring in, that it was very difficult to have a detailed conversation with anyone, because it was a little bit, like the story, the elephant, where everyone's touching it, trying to describe the elephant is like their side of the problem. And what I ended up doing was putting together a fairly simplistic view of the outcome that we were trying to drive. And I was constantly walking around to the various stakeholders, trying to align them to this very simple view. And everyone had their parochial interest of what they wanted, but I was trying to align them on this very simple view. Because on these bigger organizations, they are very complex because you have so many different stakeholders that are at the table with those different lenses that they are looking through. And so the biggest piece of advice I always have is simplify. Simplify it down to the point where you guys are all talking at least about the same outcomes, and then slowly start to add back in the complexity. Because most people start with all the complex tasks that have to get done, and you lose the plot of what it is that you're actually trying to do. And the second you lose the plot, you really lose any hope of consensus of what you're trying to drive forward. So I always start with that simple piece. The other thing that I always talk about is like, who's your cheerleader? Like, who's the person who's coming in and really sponsoring this and willing to be the person that walks around and puts their name on it. And one of the things that I don't even remember who I borrowed this term from, but I always sort of gravitated to this term around the integrated nonconformist. And it's to find that person who is inside an organization and they are accepted, but they are a nonconformist in the sense that they can drive that change. Because if you go too far and they're the non-integrated nonconformist, well, the company will reject them. And if you go the other way and they are the integrated conformist, the organization will love them, but they can't drive change. And so you've got to find that person that really sits in the middle, that's able to take that sort of simple view of what we're trying to accomplish, and they can help balance that piece out. And you'll notice that, like, at no point was I talking about the technology. I was talking about, like, how do you find that person that's actually able to come in, drive that change such that you can get the momentum of the organization behind it, and then you start lining up the subject matter experts that you actually need to drive against it. But it really has to start with that leadership framework of how do you create momentum and how you sell it.
I really like this idea of the integrated nonconformist. Is that what the term was?
That's the term. Like I said, I definitely I did not make that up. I borrowed that, and I don't remember where I borrowed it from, but it's been with me for over a decade at this point. And at various points, I've described myself with it, and I've also described who I'm looking to hire with it.
It's a really good framework, I think. It's a great balance, and it also kind of looks at that fresh pair of eyes, creativity, human in the loop. Everything that we've discussed kind of is exemplified by this one term, I think.
I think so. Like I said, I don't want to presuppose that everyone likes it the way that I do, but it's always really resonated with me, and I'll bring it up from time to time. I was actually thinking about it yesterday, which is why I brought it up today during this discussion.
Yeah, I think these are the folks that actually are able to make change, right? That's what you said.
They're able to make change without breaking everything. You know, they're essentially walking that right balance between respecting that you've got, because you made the point, like, these are older companies. In a new company, you can say, hey, look, we're doing something brand new. There's no prior before. But the second you have some history to you, you have a culture, you have a history that you have to respect. It doesn't mean that you should not be trying to change it, but you do have to understand that you have to respect that there were a lot of smart people that were there before you that did things a certain way. And you've got to plot that path of how do you drive change without sort of triggering the antibody response within that organization.
Yeah. That, I think, for me personally, this will really help, this framework, this concept, and I'm sure the audience will really appreciate it as well. My last question to you. How do you see enterprise AI shaping up in the next 3 years or 5 years or so? Any predictions?
Oh gosh, I'm leery of predicting what's going to happen tomorrow at this point. I mean, I do fundamentally believe that you are going to see more and more workflows split into that parallel view that we were talking about. I absolutely believe that you are going to see more and more employees gravitate towards that full stack view. And that means that you are going to see a broad proliferation of agents that they are able to orchestrate, kind of from the middle of that. I think the more you get into the physical world, as you think about companies, the diffusion will take longer just because you come across more and more friction points. So the more legacy, the more physical, the more friction points that are ultimately there. But over that 3 to 5 year window, it's hard for me to come up with many examples of industry verticals that will not be adopting in this manner.
So it's going to be like a broad-based AI approach across.
That's certainly my belief, and that doesn't mean that I believe that everyone is simply going to adopt a frontier model-led approach. I believe there's lots of approaches that will come out of this, and I think you are going to see a fragmentation, because I think you're not going to see the world's largest companies just simply accept that there's going to be 3 or 4 vendors that everything has to go through. But in terms of redesigning workflows, redesigning workforces, aligning data, being able to drive this level of business transformation, yes, over the next 3 to 5 years, I do think you will see this touch practically all aspects of the economy.
Wow, that's very interesting, and I think many conversations can be had about that. But for this one, it was just, I think, such an important conversation to have, especially in 2026. And your insights will help our audience so much. Tom, thank you so much for joining us on Enterprise Unlocked.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you so much. It was amazing. Thanks again. And to our audience, thank you for tuning in. Keep listening to Enterprise Unlocked. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for the Enterprise Thought Leadership Podcast. Please do follow us on social media and subscribe for more ideas and insights. Until next time.